welcome everybody. Camilla's in midair or equivalent between Sweden and Australia. So, yeah, a little forum for us to discuss between ourselves and anybody else that's interested in on the wonderful world of CBDCs. So, what I might do to kick off, and actually, and it's very much an open discussion. But what I might do is just go down round. I might start with Max actually, because Max probably has the most unusual perspective. And so, yeah, a little bit of little intro, and then, yeah, how do you fit in the wonderful world of CBDCs? And then we'll move to Zenon and Elixir. And actually, if it's only a small group, we can keep going. But Max, maybe if you start and what you're seeing happening in the wonderful world of CBDs, because you've got a particularly interesting perspective, I think.
Thank you, Anthony. I don't know, guys, if you can hear me well.
We can hear you very well.
Fantastic. So, yeah, I've been in China. I'm from Argentina, Buenos Aires originally. I've been living in China for more than 18 years. And I've been always related, working for E&Y first, and then working for a boutique M&A cross-border company that now is becoming a digital bank. In the meantime, also for 4 years, I ran a bank in Beijing between 2018 and 2021. And I was involved at the early stage talking to People's Bank of China that they created it's an independent entity where they started studying the possibility of issuing a CBDC back in 2015. And it's interesting how in China, I will go back to the moment when WeChat became popular. That was in the year 2013, the winter of 2013, that is near Chinese New Year. Somebody in the marketing team realized that WeChat was a very powerful tool, but the database was going down. Basically, WhatsApp and at the time Line was very popular in China, and but they realized that with the network and the community they had, they could create this concept of red envelopes that in China is very common. You give a red envelope for almost everything. You have a new kid, you move your house, you change jobs, you get married, you get a red envelope. So the team of WeChat, that Chinese New Year in 2013, January 2013, released millions of renminbi in Hongpao, red envelopes. So immediately, WeChat became a platform that held real money, because what they did was they went to the stores and they said, these guys can use the money that they have there. And so the WeChat, that was a social media platform, became a payment tool. And immediately, Alibaba realized with Alipay, they could do the same thing. The thing is, they don't have a social platform. Alibaba has TikTok, but probably I don't know if anybody here in the group, we are 9-10 people. I don't think anybody heard of it. If you know, in China, it's not even popular among the employees of Alibaba. Employees of Alibaba to be pushed to use TikTok. TikTok is very useful. It's very powerful for everything, even for doing a thing like we're doing now, could be even much better than Zoom, but nobody knows about it. So this is the funny things of marketing and penetration of social media tools. So going back, at the time, this created a revolution. I remember being at the time shareholder of a couple of restaurants and F&B places. And I told the guys, because I was involved with it and I was very close to people doing and thinking in cross-border transactions, I said, guys, we need to pay attention to this, because now it's 80% of our collections are in cash, 20% with foreign credit cards, foreign or local credit cards. And all, from one day to another, if you have an F&B venue here in China now, 95, 98, 99% of the money comes into your account comes through either WeChat or Alipay. I would say 80% WeChat, 20% Alipay. So because of that, like I said before, and because my proximity to PBOC, I was very interested in the analysis that they were doing and the pilot programs they were going to launch. So technically, I was the first foreigner in China to make a payment with digital renminbi back in the 11th of June of 2021. This is more than 13 months ago, more than a year ago. It works exactly the same as WeChat and Alipay, but it has big differences because it's controlled by the People's Bank of China and it's totally centralized. So that goes on the other side of what you know about crypto, you know. So basically, I became a reference for many players. There are people even saying that foreigners, we cannot use it. So I made a video. My son, he was 7 years old at the time. He made a video with me when I made a payment. So I will share those links with you guys later. You will see, it's super interesting to see. It works exactly the same as any QR code reader. The big difference is that, like I said before, is controlled and secure, and it's very safe. And of course, the big difference is 0 commissions compared to WeChat or Alipay. That's a game changer. So WeChat and Alipay will either have to put the commissions down or they will disappear. And this is my personal view of the market. So let me give this as my personal intro about CBDC and why I became close, and I open the floor to more introductions. So thank you, Anthony. Thank you. Welcome, everybody.
Max, that's fascinating. And yeah, I'm sure we'll have lots of discussion around that. Zenon, you're our man on the ground in the cross-border world of this in Bali with Bank of Indonesia and the G20. So, and obviously you've got a long history in this area as well. So it'd be lovely to get both a little bit of background like Max and then your take on CBDC and maybe how it's fitting into the stuff you're doing at the moment in Bali.
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. And I'm going to turn off my video because my internet is quite bad here. So hopefully that will keep me online. So my background, not dissimilar than Max in certain respects. I used to work at a bank as well for Citibank, originally in the US and then in Europe. When I left the organization, I was the head of technology for Citigroup in Portugal and then moved out to China with Intel, where I was. So I got there, I guess, slightly later in 2004 and did that for a couple of years and then set up Capra in Asia. So we are a market research and consulting company focused on the financial industry in Asia. So, I mean, my interest in this space really stems from when Bitcoin really started to get traction in China in probably 2012, 2013. So I'd already seen kind of the rise of e-commerce in China, and I saw how cryptocurrencies were starting to take hold. I wrote a book on Bitcoin in 2014 and then have kind of over the past 7 or 8 years stayed tangentially involved in both the cryptocurrency space and obviously the CBDC space as it's grown. The work that we do really works with commercial organizations to help them understand how this impacts them, as well as with multinational organizations like the UN, Asian Development Bank, Alliance for Financial Inclusion, to understand how CBDCs will impact financial inclusion across multiple different geographies. So right now we're working on a Pacific Islands FinTech Innovation Challenge that will be focused on obviously Pacific Islands here in Singapore at the end of July. And as Anthony hinted, I'm in Bali right now on the sidelines of the G20. They're having a central bank digital currency summit and some discussions around this. And I think what was really interesting about the event was twofold. I mean, first of all, it is to a certain extent the blind leading the blind in this. You know, China has definitely gone forward on CBDCs, but the feeling from a lot of jurisdictions is that there are a lot of open questions. Firstly, on the overall policy and regulatory approach to CBDCs, both in terms of how do we, what are the problems that we're trying to solve, and then how do we address that? And then obviously, you know, for certain jurisdictions, actually the technical skills to be able to implement something like a CBDC. And then on the retail side of things is how do we get people to actually use this? And is this what people really want? And clearly, you know, in the China experiment, which is furthest along thus far, you know, adoption was a challenge for the ECNY at the very beginning. And integrating that into Alipay and WeChat Pay has certainly helped. You know, it was clear that it was going to be the case from the start, but it's really, you know, how do we continue to adopt this? And then in a place like the US, or somebody down here mentioned the example of Canada. If you remember, there were strikes in Ottawa a couple months ago, and one of the ways that the government kind of retaliated against the protesters was to shut off their payments, so make it more difficult for them to make payments. So when you face a situation like that, where the government is actually looking to shut down payments, how much trust would you have in having a CBDC? So, you know, one of the benefits of China is they can say, yes, this is what we're going to do, but it's not quite so simple in more kind of liberal democracies in how to go forward on this. So let me pause there and pass it on to others for intros.
Yeah, that's perfect, Zenon, and yeah, great timing. And I'm sure there'll be lots of areas we can get into. Maybe, you know, you referred to the US and Canada, and obviously Europe and the UK are an important part of the mix as well. And Nilixi is across there and actually heavily involved in both of those huge markets. Well, certainly the ECB. So Nilixi, maybe a bit of an introduction, how you fit in, and yeah, and likewise some of your observations of where things are in your part of the world.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Anthony. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody that we have on the call today. I'm Nilix Devlukia. Like my predecessors, I also started my life in financial services in a large retail bank in the UK. I then followed a slightly different path in that I went to work for the UK regulator, the FCA. I started my sort of life in crypto and then CBDC, originally thinking all about Bitcoin and the legal and regulatory implications that could have, you know, question like, is it money? Do we need to worry about it even? Working with my fellow regulator at the time, the Bank of England. I have more recently been focusing on the regulatory and policy issues for CBDC in cryptocurrencies, particularly looking at the proposed MiCA legislation in the EU, the consultations in the UK, and then also working with providers to think about, as Zenon highlighted, what are the policy and regulatory issues for central banks. And I sit on the European Central Bank's market advisory group for a digital euro. And like central banks across the globe, they are absolutely tackling those big ticket issues about distribution, adoption, cost, as we've, you know, Max touched upon. They are, I think, scratching their heads at times on how to build this ecosystem, not just from a technology perspective. I think in some ways that is the easier nut to crack, but dealing with those big ticket policy issues of, you know, disintermediation, privacy, and anonymity, control. Those are the conundrums that need to be tackled, and I'm sure that we will discuss some of those as our conversation progresses. Thank you, Anthony.
Lovely. No, that's wonderful. And maybe just I'll give you a brief little bit of my background, and then we can keep going. We'll start opening up to questions and keep going. So I came out here. I didn't start at a bank. I actually did some other stuff, but then I ended up at a bank. You know how it is. So that was 25 years ago in Hong Kong, and the biggest bank in Hong Kong, HSBC, or Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. When I found the job there, they had a problem they hadn't solved for roughly 150 years, which was how to make money. Because if you've been to Hong Kong, and I suspect nearly everybody has, Hong Kong bank issues the banknotes. In fact, with the exception of the $10 note, all the notes are issued by, well, 3 banks, HSBC, Standard Chartered, Bank of China. So effectively, we have a stable note, if you want me to use that expression. So we fully understand how to run, and it's linked to backed by the US dollar, how to run that. HSBC, when I joined them, had a problem because they wanted to create electronic money, which was distributed e-cash on a smart card. It was actually what became MasterCard Cash, at the time called Mondex. The 2 other big banks, this was HSBC Hang Seng, the 2 other big banks did Visa Cash. And I actually was the originator. I created the money. So I held $500 million in my hand briefly on a card before got sent off a bullion truck and sent to main treasury. And we changed every retail bank system in the bank, did a big rollout, all that stuff. But it completely failed because it was worse than cash. You charged the customer for it, merchants hated it, it was slower than cash. Technology is actually on your chip cards because it was really good technology, but the actual premise of there wasn't a problem to be solved. I then did a few other things. Then I went and joined a little transport company that had done some automatic fare collection, a company called MTR with a product called Octopus. And I joined them to actually do digital cash. And we became the biggest small notes and coins displacer of cash anywhere in the world for a period. Got to about 80% in the transport area, about 50% elsewhere. Because it was actually 10 times, it had a real use case, which was transport, and then we worked hard at it, 10 times better than cash. So my experience of changing customer retail behavior is you're either 10 times better or you pay them 10%, give or take. So yeah, all the banks completely failed. This little startup completely that the banks ignored succeeded. And then I went on to do other things around financial services on the smartphone, and then and then most recently the challenger banks. Hong Kong is moving quite fast. So we've had a couple, as a FinTech Association, we've fed back comments both technically and policy-wise on the Hong Kong dollar. And there's just a couple of observations I'd make there. One, they're struggling to find a use case, frankly, and we suggested a few back, which I can refer to. Second, the prudential way of working is clear because Hong Kong already has it, frankly. We already know how to do this because of the stable notes. What's different, and I think important for jurisdictions elsewhere, is our comment back was, not personally, but as the FinTech Association and also personally, there's likely to be 2 or 3 flavors of Hong Kong dollar. One will interoperate with the ECNY. The ECNY is about to appear in Hong Kong in the first place anywhere where it gets accepted outside the mainland, which means I might be able to follow you, Max, and get hold of some. Then the Hong Kong dollar using the same technology could be accepted in the Greater Bay Area. Then there's an issue around inclusion of small businesses that are being excluded from the banking system, the SMEs, which are the backbone of the economy. They're pretty much being pushed out of the banks here, debanked. We'll talk about that. And then there's the retail crypto protection. So having something that you can trust to do instant settlement. There's at least 2 flavors of technology needed there. So the prudential controls, the rules, the risk management, the guarantees the same, but there's a real, and I think there's a comment already made, let's not worry too much about the technology because we can solve that. There's some things, but it isn't a binary technology decision, just as frankly, any of our systems, they upgrade over time. So I'll pause there and maybe quickly open it to the floor for some questions, and then we can pick up some themes. But let's see, we've got a very distinguished group here. So Lucky or May, anything that springs to mind, and then we can open up a little bit more.
Yeah,
Sure.
for me,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Mike.
Lucky, go.
No, go ahead, May.
No, because I think for Australia that we are just in the beginning, still at the research phase. So our REN has set up the task force to look at what it's going to look like. And for the region perspective, I've been following the digital yuan. So it will be interesting to see and understanding that for the digital yuan is account based, it's not tokenized, and it's centralized, it's not on the blockchain, and it's only at this point in time it's only into the retail. And of course, I have ambition to go to wholesale and possibly to disrupt dollars. So just want to understand that how it's being evolved and what are the learnings that like can learn from more like as in the region as a leader for the CBDC to Oceania.
Cool.
So, Lucky, yeah.
My
Max,
turn?
that sounds like one for you, Max. Do you want to tackle that one first? Then we'll come to you, Lucky.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, it's super interesting what you just been mentioning. You know, the central bank digital currency is a concept that not without name, but as a potential participation in trade finance and in global business was introduced back in 1899 by an economist called Silvio Gesell. He was a German economist that was traveling around Latin America. And he realized that the money at the time was in control of small groups of very wealthy people. So he saw that the development of the countries in Latin America was slowed down because of this. So in his opinion and his papers that you can find online, he developed this idea of expiration date for the currency, with the intention of moving this capital that was in hands of only 10, 15, 20 rich families in each of the countries in Latin America. If we go now back to China, going to what May just said, the central bank here, PBOC, is exploring to include an expiration date in the digital renminbi. And this might be controversial in some way, revolutionary in another way. In my point of view, the use of this can be really, really good when we think about the possibility of stimulating the economy or certain areas or certain groups of retailers or generating discounts, subsidies, things that are very common in every single country where we are right now. But in order to implement that with the current paper money, it's very, very difficult. And of course, for Silvio Gesell, the expiration date was very complex because it has to be printed in printed notes, so it was almost impractical. But at this moment, with the digital renminbi, with digital currencies globally, it's not crazy to think about that. So again, this is one example about how ideas from the past can be implemented with technology of the present day.
Max, very interesting. And actually, Hong Kong, and The Economist talked about this, happy to share the link later. So Hong Kong had had stimulus money that could only be spent in retail, $2,500 US, and it worked. And actually, it was actually the way they got everybody into they hadn't quite got everybody and nearly all the merchants into the system. But once they, well, if you pay me $2,500, then you're going to get me in the system. So even everybody had Octopus for traveling, but they hadn't quite got all the way to some of the other systems, although Octopus ended up being dominant. But yeah, it's been a very successful experiment, and that all has, well, nearly all. There's a subtlety in Octopus if you're ever interested, but the other one's a straight expiration date on Alipay, WeChat, and a MasterCard piece of infrastructure. Lucky, you were going to, I'm sure you'll have a question.
Yeah, so actually following up from May's comment, and also actually Danielle just put a comment there that in Australia we do have like a stimulus package called Dine and Discover and things like that, that has the expiry date that you can only use it for dining or entertainment, and then staying like staycation at the hotel, things like that, which actually bring up like this is the use case for CBDC with the programmable money, that potentially we can have the better distribution, lower cost, and things like that, which is an opportunity for every country really, especially after the pandemic. There's a lot of use cases that basically can we help. CBDC is one of the solution. I mean, crypto is pretty much like programmable money, but I think that having that kind of like value of CBDC is quite important. And then May also mentioned about the account-based and token-based wallet as well. And I'm aware that Bank of England actually looking at account base as well. I think my question is like, what is the pros and cons of account based and token based, and then what determine like the design basically of going one way or to the other?
Nick, so do you want to pick up, since there was a Bank of England reference there, do you want to pick that one up? Oh, you're on mute, just as I was just recently.
I don't know I'm ever going to get away from the you're on mute. It's so I think sometimes the sort of distinction between account-based and token-based, it can be jurisdiction specific. I think it's, you know, how policymakers want to roll out their CBDC. But I think there are some very practical concerns around particularly offline payments that drives the conversation on token-based. You know, and it's all to do with the sort, as I say, the practical issues of, you know, double spending, avoiding double spending, reconciliation. Token-based, the ECB particularly, when it issued its consultation about 18 months ago now, maybe longer. COVID means I lose track of time as to which year we're in, given that we've had these couple of years of, you know, unusual status of not traveling and being at home. They talked about having an account-based system, but also tokens that would accommodate this sort of requirement for offline functionality. But I think there's another point there as well, is how much does a policymaker want their CBDC to look like cash and act like cash? And again, the token-based approach is often discussed when they want a more cash-like product, in effect, one that may give better anonymity to be akin to cash. The ECB particularly has said that its digital euro is never going to be anonymous. And that's because, you know, you will at some point have to register in order to obtain some digital euro. Now, there might be anonymity in a payment chain, but it's never actually going to be fully anonymous. But there is this whole big conversation around, you know, how do you protect privacy and who should have access to data? But just going back to Lucky's question, I think the debates, you know, if I sum up around account-based and token-based, one, it depends on how much the policymaker wants their digital currency to look like cash and act like cash. Two, how do they want to manage offline payments? It seems at present that a token-based system makes that more practicable. But two, you know, three, I think there is always that discussion around AML compliance and what that means for anonymity, and more so maybe again in a token-based system rather than an account-based system. And I'm sure that Anthony, yourself, or Zenon or Max will also have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, Zenon, Zenon, oh sorry. Zenon, I'm just wondering, you've, like you say, you got really early involved with Bitcoin in China, and obviously you're a technologist. What are your thoughts on the balance between these two, and whether, and what's fit for purpose? Because we actually all survive on a payment systems that already are not absolute. I don't know if you recall when there was a period maybe 15 years ago when the US government discovered from the risk people I know, I assumed it was true, that they had perfect $100 counterfeit, and it took them quite a while to spot it. So we live in a system where nothing's perfect. So yeah, so Zenon, what are your thoughts around the pros and cons of account versus token?
Yeah, it's I mean, I think there's no single answer. And one of the things that's come up in the event over the past day here is that there will be coexistence, at least for the foreseeable future, meaning, probably 10 years out even, where, some countries like the US decide to go with a stable coin, whereas others like China are going with CBDCs. And, for any jurisdiction, you'll have any number of choices of how to make that payment. And I think, with that, there could be a combination of account-based and token-based accounts there. So sorry, it's a very easy out, but I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to this. I think it's really jurisdictional based. I mean, that's been kind of clear from the discussions here as well, is that, some countries, it's a variety of things, right? Like in the US, there would be pushback on a CBDC, so it's more likely stable coins. In Singapore, there's not really a demand for CBDCs. In China, it makes a lot of sense because it's a huge population with capital controls and various other elements to that. So I think with all of the decisions around CBDCs, the account versus token is by jurisdiction decisions in my mind.
Yeah, and I think in terms of underlying technology, so going offline is one thing. So that chip-based one was fully distributed. So it actually relied on the chip security, the trusted execution element, and it provided all of this stuff is an entry in a ledger somewhere.
Yeah.
In some shape or form. So that one relied on the chip security and actually tried to work out if somebody managed to get into that. But then obviously the bank would have to honor it. The double spending is a whole thing that obviously, the approaches to the blockchain as approach, but it has an overhead. It has quite a big overhead, depending whether you're trusting it or not. And then there's a level of risk tolerated. So I think one of the things we've observed, especially with the HKMA technical paper here as an example, there's it's all fit for purpose. There's no technical absolutism on this stuff. And maybe picking up your comment, Lucky, if I was to advise one thing from the scars I have, is program around the money, not in the money. Because once you've got immutable code, which we had when we put this out in the field, and then a clever Cambridge professor did differential power analysis and cracked the keys, and we had to roll out a little patch to it, which is what scripting on credit cards is. So again, don't believe the hype of the engineers that this is smart contracts are perfect, because they won't have tested it. It's not possible. Even for a very simple application, it's incredibly difficult to get the testing up. So maybe I can see John's on the call. John, any particular things that are top of your mind?
Oh, well, Anthony, thank you very much. Really interesting chat here. The question I just wanted that was a pique of my curiosity was around the potential international aspects of, for example, the ECNY, if it is utilized overseas in foreign jurisdictions. What is that something that will be allowed I do know that the US are talking, or there is talk there about bringing some legislation to bear where apps won't be allowed to support the ECNY. And I suspect it is for that reason that the domestic economies there'll be a lack of transparency around those transactions. And, you know, to the points earlier about tax and monitoring of movements of currency, there may be, you know, there may be some restrictions on that. So I guess I was just interested to know, is there any, you know, thoughts from Europe or other international markets, you know, whether this will be acceptable, whether Alipay and WeChat Pay and other apps, will they be allowed to support this, the ECNY and other such currencies across borders?
Max, what are you hearing? And then maybe in Elixir, I don't know if it's popped up there. I can obviously comment on Hong Kong, but Max, maybe first.
I was saying to John, because he asked this question in the chat, and I was saying that it's very important to remember. I will go back to another historical moment in the financial industry. Most of you already read probably a lot in university or through your activity in banking, and the year is 1944. What happened in 1944? In 1944, the US realized, somebody was extremely smart, that 95% of the gold reserves of the world were in the US. I'm not going to go into in details of the movement of gold from Europe to the US before the occupation and so on, but you can go deep research on this, and you will read very, very funny stories about that, even during the 30s. My point here is very simple. The world, even the war was still going on, because 44, the war was not finished, needed some common grounds for the future of trade finance, for the future of trading, for the future of global payments. And this is where I go back to John's question. And this is where I think we should be looking at now. We should be thinking, and been talking about this for over 2 years. We need to think of a new Bretton Woods, I will call it 2.0, and most likely will happen in a city here in China or in some other neutral ground place. And why do I say this? It's very simple. What happens if tomorrow, going back to the fact that is the ECNY going to be accepted outside China? And the question is another different one. What happens if tomorrow any buyer of goods from China is paying the exporter, whether those goods come from the US, from Australia, from Argentina, from Brazil, from anywhere that sells goods to China today, mostly food or commodities, and the buyer here in China, let's say COFCO, tells the exporter, I have to pay you in digital renminbi. Don't forget that you have the two renminbis. It's a very technical issue what I'm going to say now, but it's important to remember. We have the CNY, that is the one we use here inside China, but also we have the CNH, that is for cross-border payments. So if I hold renminbi in my account in HSBC Hong Kong, I have CNH, I don't have CNY. And those are not fully convertible. And this is a big issue, it's a technical issue, I should say it because it's part of this. But going back to the story I was telling, the question is, what happens then if COFCO tells me I am an exporter of meat from Argentina, I have to pay in digital renminbi? My first reaction will be, no, I want US dollar. I want to go through the SWIFT code. Okay, no, I cannot pay in any other different way. Okay, I don't sell anymore to you. I go to China Light. I call China Light, that is the second largest importer. And the same, China Light will tell me, no, sorry, the only way I can pay you is digital renminbi. So there, the problem will come to the Central Bank of Argentina. So the Central Bank of Argentina at this moment should be speaking with the Central Bank of China, as the Central Bank in Hong Kong is already connected, like Anthony was explaining. In Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore that used to share offices with me when I was in Argentina National Bank in Beijing, we talk about this for a long time. They are already discussing with the authorities running the pilot of the digital renminbi, and so on. Emirates, Thailand, there are a lot of countries in discussion. So going back to what John said, if the US are planning to try to stop this in some way, I don't think it will be a successful move. I think the only way to move forward is having a global agreement, exactly what happened in Bretton Woods 1944. The big differences are that in 1944, the US has the winning hand, and probably they were the only ones having the winning hand, because not any of the other countries winning the war had any gold. And now the winning hand, I would say most likely is on this side. Why? Because China has the power of the purchasing power. So that is giving more strength to the renminbi. And a move that recently happened by PBOC, you probably remember, a couple of weeks ago, the trading hours for foreign exchange of renminbi were extended to 18 hours a day. And this is a clear indication that what I just said goes in the direction of what will happen in the future. We will see global digital currencies. I'm even talking about the possibility of creating a global clearing of digital currencies, because otherwise we will have countries deciding to do, and the countries with more purchasing power will win. So again, guys, this is a discussion. I'm not giving you, I'm giving you my personal impression and what I'm living right now here, and what my thoughts are on my background and the studies I'm doing on this. I don't think I have the final truth, but definitely remember what I was saying today. I think it will be a recording on this, because this will start happening very, very soon. One last thing to finish. As John was saying, it was a senator back in December, before the games in Beijing 2022, the Winter Games, that he mentioned, or two senators, that none of the athletes from the US are going to be able to make payments in digital renminbi in China and so on, and that didn't happen. So again, I don't think here we have room for a lot of political moves. Here we need to take action, and we need to sit down. Central banks need to sit down. If you see what happened, Christine Lagarde said it recently in Europe. It's time to think of a digital euro. It's time to think of how are we going to implement the digital euro. So again, this is my personal point of view, but I think that this is going to be the way in the years to come.
So I guess, Zenon, you're sat with at least people involved with at least the G20 side of this. What's been, to the extent you can share, what's been discussed is, and to what extent is that flavor of the need for interoperability in central bank digital currencies, or is the cross-border problem going to be solved in a different way?
Yeah, so I mean, a big participant here is the BIS, and they're, I think this afternoon they're showcasing some of their cross-border initiatives and some of the projects they've been doing on that. I mean, their vision. It's interesting if you look at the real-time payment side of things. So I was sitting in a car with Andrew McCormick from BIS in Singapore, and so Nexus is one of his pet projects. And basically what they're trying to do is set standards, right? Like here's the playbook for interoperability between cross-border real-time payment systems. So they kind of understand that their role is not to create a new SWIFT or a new third party that's sitting in the middle, but just to try and organize, herd the cats, so to speak, in terms of like bringing everybody together in terms of creating a cross-border real-time payment system. And I think on the CBDC side of things, I mean, apparently the BIS project in Hong Kong just keeps on increasing in scope. Project Dunbar, I guess. I think that I forget what the current name is for that, Anthony. One that
M-Bridge. They've renamed it. I think they've renamed it M-Bridge, but I think it is. Yeah.
So it just keeps on expanding in terms of the scope that's there. I mean, they didn't get into the they weren't allowed to speak to even to the measures that Max did, which was still relatively politically on the straight and narrow. But obviously, with these guys being quoted, they weren't able to say much about what they thought from the political side. But there were some interesting conversations around the terminology escapes me, but basically, when people from one country start using the CBDC of another country, right? So all of a sudden you have a US dollar CBDC, however far off that is, and then people in the Bahamas or African countries or even here in Indonesia start using something like that. And the feeling that a gentleman from the IMF, Tommaso, also Italian, was proposing is that CBDC should operate in their own jurisdictions and not have any cross-border use cases, but rather cross-border interoperability. So effectively, the ECNY ends at the borders of China, and then it becomes whatever the local currency is there. I think the challenge in all of that is obviously getting harmony around this. As Max rightly pointed out, China's in a slightly different position than it was, even 10 years ago in terms of political strength. I mean, the one thing the US still has going for it is that commodities are still priced in US dollars. And really, the discussion about ECNY creating, internationalizing the renminbi is really neither here nor there, because sitting in London, getting renminbi has never been a problem. You just open up an account with the local bank of, I think China Construction Bank maybe is the offshore clearer in London, and then you're off to the races in terms of accepting renminbi. So access has never been an issue. So the ECNY doesn't really change the game from that perspective. But the underlying geopolitical forces are really what determines what's the hegemonic currency in this space. So there was kind of the worry that there would be this slippage of certain countries using that, and the feeling was that the only way to address that is to really just limit it to the countries themselves. But that's one thing, and I'd love to hear Max's comments on this, because I don't know where it is at the moment, but the offshore usage of the renminbi has always been a big question in my mind, because you have this view that capital control is in China, but say you have two people sitting in London who both have e-renminbi wallets, and digitally they send each other the equivalent of 100,000 pounds, and then they exchange physically or through bank accounts in the UK 100,000 pounds, then they're evading capital controls technically. So how does the government handle that? And so that's one of the big question marks in my mind, is how the e-renminbi is going to be handled internationally. But clearly that they've been part of the trial, as my understanding is, with Mbridge, certainly about that. But interoperability might be the answer.
Max, do you want to pick that one up, or is that an Elixir? Is that one you've bumped into? Because obviously London's the world pioneer in offshore circulation of money, and the fact that doesn't always touch the sovereign rules.
Exactly. I mean, I think, Max and Zenon have articulated some of the challenges very well. I think it's important, though, just to highlight that this issue about cross-border payments is not specific to central bank digital currencies. Obviously, the G20's meeting is going on. They've got, 19 building blocks, all about cross-border payments. Only one is about CBDC, one is about stable coins, and the other 17 are about how do we make cross-border payments cheaper, faster, better today. And I think that this is one of the stumbling blocks that CBDC hits. You mentioned about a bit, what does CBDC solve for that cannot be achieved in other ways and means that could actually be more cost effective for industry? And there's a timing issue here as well, in that we've got some very small jurisdictions that have launched CBDC. We have this massive pilot going on in China, but yet the rest of the world is still talking about and thinking about how to implement better, faster payments. And there are jurisdictions that may leapfrog sort of more traditional faster payments and issue a CBDC as the solution to faster payments because they don't have it. But there's also very large jurisdictions, and the US is the prime example, which is thinking about CBDC is, in some instances quite late to the CBDC party, and has got a huge investment in getting FedNow off the ground. And so, there is that ongoing challenge of which track a jurisdiction is going to take. And then I think it goes back to this conversation about interoperability, in that for those jurisdictions where they already have entrenched faster payment systems, have invested a lot of time, effort and money into those systems, how will a CBDC overlay onto those systems? Because I think the industry is going to be quite averse to being asked to put up a lot of capital in order to support, a brand new CBDC payment system.
Sorry to just interrupt on the back of that. I think if governments are trying to make cross-border payments bigger or better, faster, cheaper, they're behind the curve, because private industry is doing that. I mean, when you look at the efforts of TransferWise and all of the other players, like the issue, any government that says, well, we're doing CBDCs to make cross-border payments cheaper is like not reading the tea leaves properly, and this is being solved by private industry. And I'm excluding SWIFT in that conversation, but I mean, they're doing a lot as well, right? So I mean, I just look at TransferWise. Well, okay, so a Singapore example with DBS. I mean, DBS is incredibly incestuous with cross-border payments, right? They use, for certain corridors, they provide services to TransferWise. So for like Sing dollar, US dollar, Sing dollar, ringgit, there's no way TransferWise can beat those prices, right? So they'll use, TransferWise will use DBS, but then on other corridors, DBS will use TransferWise, right? So if you're going Sing dollars, South African rand, as an example, I mean, Wise is going to have a better footprint in South Africa than DBS, to be honest. And so they'll use that. And then you have the third party players like Visa Direct that are coming in that are offering these services as well. So, I'm all for making things cheaper, but I mean, the fees are so low. Like DBS, okay, I understand they take a margin on the FX, but to give an example, I moved about $10,000 from my account from Citibank in the US. So Citibank charged me $25 for the pleasure of moving money. It got to my wife's US dollar DBS account in Singapore. She didn't pay any money to receive it. She sent exactly $10,000 to the destination account in Hong Kong in US dollars, and there were no fees. DBS charged no fees in that whole thing. And that's the way cross-border payments could be. I mean, I understand that, banks have to make money and they have to survive, but they can do it in other ways, right? It's the other services that they can layer on top of that. Sorry, just something that struck me about that.
No, Zenon, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, industry has solved already for faster, cheaper cross-border payments, but I think it's some of those wider policy issues that obviously the G20 and the FSB and the IMF are all looking to address, because obviously it's faster and cheaper, but probably only in certain corridors. The more exotic currencies or the more hard to reach jurisdictions don't benefit from the rollouts that industry provide, because there's obviously, it's limited, it's not commercially effective. And you did raise that big topic of actually cross-subsidization, and that's primarily how payments are fast and cheap today.
Yeah, I think so. Wonderful discussion. I think we just got a couple of minutes, so maybe just a quick leaving thought. If we, maybe starting with Max, just a quick leaving thought. Yeah, we've got a sort of 30-second leaving thought as we wrap up. Wonderful discussion. Oh, Max is either very still or frozen. Zenon, while Max rejoins us, maybe your quick leaving thought. I'm sure there's many of them, but just a quick one.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned most of what I wanted to say. I guess the one last thing that I would mention, and the questions that I think aren't being asked, is what this actually means for consumers. I mean, we did a study with the UN about a year and a half ago looking at humanitarian cash transfers, and fundamentally, most humanitarian contexts, it's cash in an envelope. So they'll pull up a armored car and they'll have a bunch of envelopes stuffed with cash and they'll hand it out to people. To the UN in New York City, that looks incredibly wasteful, right? You should load a prepaid card and then you should pass it around, and it's much cheaper than cash in a van, which is true, but it doesn't take into account the beneficiary preference. And if that person who's receiving that prepaid card then needs to walk 5 kilometers to an ATM to use it, then all is, they'd rather just get cash in an envelope, to be honest, because that's going to be cheaper for them. And I think that's, despite all the good work that BIS is doing in terms of the research around this and everything else, I think we're missing this whole chunk of like what a retail CBDC means to consumers. Because in certain places like China, you can, when you're looking at carrot and stick, China can use stick a hell of a lot more than carrot. But in the US or someplace else, or in Canada, as the example I said before, it has to be carrot. And if your carrot is already rotten and run over, then how do you actually do that? So I think that's the whole consumer side of things, and how do we prepare as a society for CBDCs is something that isn't talked about but should be talked about.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Zenon, Max, quick parting thought. Now you're back.
Yes, I am back, guys. Again, this is very fruitful conversation, and like I was saying, the question and the big concern of global governments for cross-border payments is being there for the last, I would say, since the euro it was the common currency in Europe, the year 2000. Because if you pay attention to the current global payment system, SWIFT code is still the leading platform. But I want to finish saying we should pay attention what happened with the change of exchange rate of the ruble in Russia. Before, after February, with the sanctions, and after the counteractions made by the central bank in Russia. So these fluctuations show that it's not easy, and
like we just lost Max again, I think. Yep.
I think global agreements we need to discuss in the platform, the G21, IMF, UN. We should find the ways of doing cross-border payments under a global agreement, like it was in 1944 Bretton Woods, or in 1973 the assumption and implementation of the SWIFT code.
Yep. Wonderful, Max. So I think Zenon had is the risk of a rotten carrot in terms of incentives. Max, you've got your global agreements. Elixir, a couple of quick words because I'm under pressure to wrap up.
Yeah, I think I would just say that investigation in this area by central banks and regulators is going to continue. It's going to pick up pace. We're going to see more pilots coming to the market. And I think that, we will be at a point in time where the larger economies, and I would highlight the EU will issue a digital currency.
Okay, so there's an inevitability. And I think my final parting thought is, one of my worries is, and it's linked to these, actually, people have an ability to conduct face-to-face economic activity. Cash is a utility which works. I think there's a risk of disenfranchising a group of people from that utility to be paid for a living, because actually, I think there's a risk if you can't get access to the stuff. So that would be my final thought. And thank you, everyone. Wonderful session.